I'm greatly honored that I've been chosen for for the award, for the Global India Award this year by MSU's Asian Studies Center. And I'm especially honored because I'm sharing this award with Rajmohan Gandhi, a good friend and an eminent public figure in the Indian subcontinent. I'd like to thank the director of the Asian Studies Center, Professor Chandra, and the committee that chose me for this award. Now, without ado, I'd like to say a few words about my interest in the subject of India US relations, and then make a few points that I think are pertinent to this relationship today. But also, at the same time, I'd like to uh, criticize or debunk, is the word, some of the myths that have been propagated about this relationship and why it seems to be flourishing today. My interest in the subject of India US relations goes back more than 50 years, as when I was a graduate student, and I was writing my dissertation on the relations on the tensions between superpowers and smaller powers who are in an alliance relationship. And one of the major cases that I chose to study was the beginnings of Pakistan's alliance with the United States. This meant that obviously India US relations became a very integral part of the dissertation and of my research. So my interest in the subject goes back more than half a century. And I've continued over the years to keep an interest in this subject, even as I have sometimes or often wandered further afield. But today, instead of singing paeans of praise about the relationship between India and the United States, as most are now wont to do, I would like to emphasize the underlying reality and causes of the ups and downs of the relationship to bring us back to earth. As most people know, there have been very rocky periods in the India American relationship, as there have been some good periods also, particularly in the last 2 decades. But there are very basic misunderstandings or myths about why India-US relations have been so rocky in the past. They have been rocky from almost from the 1950s till the 1990s, not because of misunderstandings on the part of Washington and New Delhi, but because both the capitals, had full understanding of each other's objectives. They also realized that there were various divergences in these objectives, which were reflected in the negative aspects of their relationship. This obviously underwent change over a period of time, and I'll come to that in a moment. The other myth that I'd also like to explode is the fact that, as many analysts say, that the flourishing relationship between the United States and India today is based on the common moral um, and ideological or the commonality of the moral and ideological perceptions. I think this is also a myth. But it is now a very popular part of the rhetoric on both sides. But this, I believe, is a veneer to hide the reality that both India and the United States, that both sides act on the basis of their national interests as determined by their leaderships. And as their evaluation or assessment of these national interests undergo change, depending both on domestic politics, but much more on the international context, their strategies undergo change. The other point that I'd like to make is that despite, again, uh, there's another myth that there's been a radical change in the relationship. There's obviously been a change, but that this change is related to the newer perceptions of of both sides regarding each other. I've argued that Indian foreign policy and the basis of its relations with the rest of the world, including the United States, shows a remarkable continuity and is built on the foundation of the Nehruvian idea of Nehru's thinking that is encapsulated by the term strategic autonomy. The nomenclatures change depending upon the international context and the exigencies of domestic politics. The nomenclatures undergo change from non-alignment to multi-alignment to Vishwaguru, etc., etc. But the reality remains the same. In a bipolar world where the U.S. Suffered from pactomania, that's in the 1950s, India's relationships, India's search for strategic autonomy, which gave birth to the concept of non-alignment, obviously meant that there were tensions between Washington and New Delhi. Because at that time, Washington's perception was that if you are not with us, then obviously you're anti-American. And there were various reasons for that that I don't have the time to go into. But this was the difference. The reason why India's relations warmed with Moscow, while they were, as I said, in a state of some tension with the United States, with Washington, was that Moscow welcomed the idea of India's strategic autonomy because it benefited it, obviously. Because there was no chance that India could ever become aligned with Moscow, given the class character of India's leadership and the fact that Moscow's alliances all its alliances rested in Eastern Europe, basically on the use of force. But there was a feeling, particularly in the West, that India belonged ideologically and therefore politically with the West. This was, in fact, an illusion because India was not interested. I mean, the whole concept of strategic autonomy was based on the idea that India should not lose its independence of action in terms of foreign policy and international relations and become a camp follower of any particular any particular alliance. There were other things, obviously, that were added to it. In the 1970s, in early 1970s, during the Bangladesh crisis and war, and I have some personal experience of that, given a set of fortuitous circumstances that allowed me to see what was going on from almost. I had a ringside seat when the United States decided to tilt, or more than tilt, towards Pakistan. The reason was that it needed Islamabad to act as a conduit for in order to improve its relationship with China. And when the Bangladesh war broke out, the Indian dependence on the Soviet Union in a way increased. That led to the Indo-Soviet Treaty. But it was very essential at that time because the Soviet Union played a remarkable role at the UN Security Council in vetoing two Security Council resolutions that asked for an immediate ceasefire. If those resolutions had been passed and implemented under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, India would have been left with an unfinished business and would have been stuck in a quagmire in East Pakistan. I can give you many more reasons as to why in those days Indian relations with the Soviet Union were very positive as compared to its relationship with the United States. But suffice it to say that it was all based on an assessment of India's national interests. I remember when Brezhnev visited, right up a year or so after the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, when Brezhnev visited New Delhi, there was a lot of criticism of the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, that she did not openly criticize the Soviet intervention in a non aligned country. A few days after Brezhnev's visit, I happened to have a meeting with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and when I raised this issue, she said, "You should realize that I'm not going to sacrifice India's national interests because it would please Pakistan or the United States." In private, she did express her criticism of the Soviet intervention, but she didn't want to do it publicly. So it was all based on national interest, and one could understand why that was happening. With the changing international context in the 1990s, with the Soviet Union collapsing and for a brief period the world becoming unipolar, obviously there was a need, or there was pressure both from within and outside on India, on New Delhi, to change its stance towards the United States. And also, the United States sensed the opportunity to improve its relationship with India, taking advantage both of its unipolarity and the emerging coincidence or convergence of interests between Washington and New Delhi regarding China. And that, in many ways, in addition to the economic and technological dimensions of the Indo-US relationship, the antagonism or animosity or apprehension of Chinese intentions forms, in a way, the bedrock of Indian American relations today. So, in a way, while the United States has continued to base its relationship not only with India but with most countries in the world on the basis of its assessment of its global needs, or assessment of its global needs in the international system, India has clung to the concept of strategic autonomy, no matter what it is called now. So we must understand that the main reasons that have led to the improvement in Indo-US relations, and I had actually in early 2000 and later advocated such an improvement, because Clinton's visit President Clinton's visit to India in the year 2000, in a way, marked the beginning, if not the zenith, of this relationship. And at that time, I had published an article in Washington Quarterly, which was titled "India Matters," in which I had argued that it's not only that the United States matters for India, but that India also matters for the United States, given the changing global context, particularly in Asia. It had been presented on a panel at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, where I shared the stage with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot and the then Indian ambassador, the late the late Naresh Chandra. So this was, it's all. I think finally the final word I want to have on this, that the relationship, one should not be carried away by euphoria about this relationship based on misunderstandings, but should understand very clearly that it is all realpolitik. Everything else is but an icing on the cake. Thank you.